Sex sells, and the only thing sexy about financial news is economic collapse. No one wants to hear that the economy is stumbling along about as well as it always has and that we really don't have any clue what's going to happen next year. So the media and influencers pull out charts of inflation or consumer debt and try and convince you that the next major downturn is coming in the next 3 to 6 months, and if it doesn't come then, it's going to be even worse when it does come. Of course, they've been doing this for about 100 years, and they're right about every 5 to 15 years. What I find so interesting about this whole cycle is that there are lots of things that we can be concerned about that we effectively know are coming. And one of those things made the front page of the Wall Street Journal today. Suddenly there aren't enough babies, the whole world is alarmed. This is about fertility rates and population collapse, something I talk a lot about on the channel. But I think most people get a misconception that this is something that's going to be a problem in the future, 15 to 20 years from now, because the population as of now is still going up. When in fact, this is a problem right now that we are starting to see the effects of right now, which we will go through. But I want to start by kind of diving into a bunch of charts. I have a lot of tabs pulled up that we're going to kind of go through, understand what's going on, including something that was new to me that I found not only interesting, but a little disturbing, which I will get to in just a minute. And then we'll close by talking about kind of why this is such a pressing matter, kind of starting right now. Here's the first infographic of the Wall Street Journal article, which pretty much shows that fertility rate was kind of steady around 5 between 1950 and 1970, but it really starts falling around 1970, down as low as 2.32 recently in 2021. Now, the article goes about how it then dropped again very dramatically over the next couple of years down to 2.15, which is very important because that's falling below the global replacement rate, which I'll explain in a minute, at 2.2. The US as low as 1.62 and South Korea 0.72. Now the fertility rate is just the average number of kids that a woman has. So you can understand the replacement rate is pretty easy to understand, somewhere around 2, where each woman needs to replace themselves and some useless male like me. But it needs to be a little bit higher than that for a couple of different reasons, which we'll get to in a minute. Is kind of this interesting thing that I learned. But that's going to cause getting a fertility rate below replacement rate is going to cause human population to level off, which is going to look something like this, where back in 2017, we expected population to kind of level off around the end of the turn of the century, somewhere around 11 billion. But recent drops in fertility rates, which we expect to possibly most likely get worse before, if they ever get better, is causing us to rethink that, and we may start hitting a max population much sooner than that, and as low as 11 billion. I've even seen some experts say that to expect it somewhere around 9.5 billion, largely because of how quickly Africa is modernizing. Here's fertility rates kind of in a couple of different countries all across the world that you might be interested in. So why does it need to be that 2.2? They summarize it here. There's really 2 reasons. One is that not all women survive to childbearing age. So the other women need to kind of make up for them. So it needs to be more than 2. The other one, which is what sent me down this kind of interesting rabbit hole and a little bit depressing, is that in developing countries where fewer girls than boys are born. So I thought, well, I have some ideas why that might be, but like, why is it that fewer girls are born than boys? So it led me to this article, which shows that in most countries, there are around 105 males born per 100 females. So 105 to every 100 girls born. Why is that? There's really 3 reasons. The first, which they explain here from this study, is that biologically, male embryos are just more likely to survive the entire from conception to birth process than females are. That is not universally through the entire pregnancy, but if you average it out, naturally more boys are born than girls because they are more likely to survive the birth process. But there are 2 other ones. The one that you're probably assuming or have jumped to, and is kind of the depressing one, is that in places where the culture values male children higher than female children, families are more likely to have abortions if they find out they're having a female, or as things as horrible as infanticide, or just plain neglect of female children is higher than of male in those cultures. But there's the third one is in the same region. So if you're in a culture that values males, statistically, and it's shown through these charts, so I'm not going to go through it all. statistically, you are more likely to stop having children after you've had a male child. So if your priority as a family is to have a male child and your first child is male, there's a good likelihood that you're not going to have another kid. Whereas if your first 1 or 2 children were girls, you are likely to keep trying until you get a male, which skews the data towards more likely being males, which is why the replacement rate is a little bit higher, even still from 2 to 2.1, as high as 2.2. Now, we look at fertility rate all across the world because a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about it. So this I'm going to highlight is all the countries with a fertility rate below 2, so well below for replacement rate. That's like China, Russia, the US, Brazil, Colombia. And then here is 2 to 3, so kind of somewhere around replacement rate, which is still a good fair portion of the world, India specifically. But really anything above that, you are really limiting yourself just to Africa. Specifically, a lot of people kind of have the misconception that South America is a populous and very fertile place, when in truth, like 3/5 of the population of South America is in Brazil and Colombia, and those countries are both well below replacement rate of 1.65 and 1.75. So this is really a worldwide phenomenon. So how do we have this situation where population is still going up, but fertility has dropped below replacement rate? To understand that, you really need to understand what is called a population pyramid. So this is one for the US specifically. This is from 1950. Each one of these little slices is a 5-year age group stacked from youngest to oldest. And you can see that back in the 50s, this was actually shaped like a pyramid, being wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. But if you go to like 1980, you'll see that the shape of this is starting to change. Now this bulge here is actually the baby boomer generation. And we push it out here to 2000. You start to see that the pyramid is really starting to look like a column. It's tall and narrow instead of wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. And then you bring this all the way to today. We'll do 2024, go back one. And you see it really is a column. Each generation, each 5-year age group is not getting bigger. In fact, it's tapering off here at the bottom. It's just getting taller. So it's not hard to understand that if fertility rates started dropping in the 70s and your average person lasts, let's just say 70 years for now, then population shouldn't start leveling off until those people start dying 70 years later, or about 2040. If I put these side by side, you can kind of see this effect. So here's 2000, 2010, 2020. You can see that in this, the bottom scale is constant, whereas this one is percentage, which can make it a little misleading. Whereas this one, the scale is the same. And you can see that this is really just getting taller. It's not getting any wider. There aren't any more people being born every 5 years. They're just stacking on top of each other. Which is why world population can be going up even though the fertility rate is dropping. If you look at this as part of the world, this kind of mesmerizing image, but it's not as complicated as it looks. This dark blue is just the same thing in 1950. You can see that very dramatic pyramid shape to it. And then 2018, you can see it's starting to become a little bit more like a column. And then these are projections at 2100 where it really has completely become a column and then has that pyramid shape at the top, as people naturally die off at different ages. So how do we have this situation where if population is still growing for the next, let's say 15 to possibly 30 years, why is this an issue now? That's best explained with this graph about the US, because we're experiencing it right now. And it has to do with where you see the transition from column to pyramid, right? So in 2000, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, the transition really happened in like 40, 45, right? So even though we were having the same number of kids each year, this column's continuing to move up. But as recently as 2020, the corner of the column has been pushed up to 60, 65, which means this column, the 65, this slice of the 65-year-olds is the same size as the 20-year-old slice. Whereas back in 2000, the 65-year-old slice was pretty small, this one, compared to the age 20 slice. This, of course, is the number of people entering the workforce. And this is the number of people leaving the workforce through retirement. And we see now that as many people are retiring as are entering the workforce. So even though world population, the consumers may be continuing to grow, the number of workers has already hit the peak in the US, and this is going to continue around the world. Over the next 10 to 15 years, the world will hit its peak of working age citizens within the next 10 to 15 years. And this is going to dramatically shape the world, right? Here in the US, we're already seeing this with our problems with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? All of these things that a large base of workers needs to pay for through taxation is starting to become very hard to manage, as even though the population continues to grow, the number of workers supporting it doesn't. But all over the world, we're going to move into a phase of economic growth where the number of workers is relatively fixed, and the major economic centers that are successful are going to be the ones that can attract these workers and keep them there in order to be able to produce for a population that is still growing but does not have a similarly increasing production base. If you've enjoyed the video and want to learn more about kind of the epicenter of population collapse, then check out this video I've done about the very specific effects of this going on in China right now. Otherwise, stick around for the channel for more content like this, and I'll talk to you soon.